Thank you. In a recent sermon, in fact, it was the last sermon that I gave that I had entitled "In God's Hands," and we were looking at points from 1 Peter chapter 5. We looked at some of the different ways where we can be in God's hands, and through that we were implying both Father and Son. And it wasn't too long after that, a few days or so, I was asked by someone if I might consider giving more information on what or where we can obtain strength and insight on how that we can do these points, how we can live these points. I mean, because they were saying, after all, we're human and we're weak, and when we compare to Father and Son, so we need some additional help. Can you help us out? And I said, okay. Brethren, please understand, first and foremost, this is the way I'm going to approach the answer to that person's question. We all need someone that we can talk to from time to time. We all need someone that we can trust. We all need someone we have ready access to go to talk to help us out. How do we do this? We also need someone who can guide us in the way that we need to go. And so therefore, we all need someone that we can counsel with on how we can do these points, how we can live this way of life, these different points that we talked about in 1 Peter chapter 5. And so, brethren, from the very beginning here in this sermon, I want us to understand that we have an answer. And I want to give that out, the answer, and that is that we have this counselor, someone we can go to, all of those different points that I was talking about, that is available to us to help us out. So with that in mind, if you would, please go with me to Isaiah chapter 9. And Isaiah chapter 9 in verse 6, we will see where it is referring to Jesus as our wonderful counselor. Isaiah 9 in verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And so, brother, in this sermon, we're going to focus on Jesus being our counselor, our wonderful counselor, and I have entitled this sermon, Jesus, our wonderful counselor. That's the answer to the question. How do we, being weak and human, how do we do these things that we talked about in 1 Peter chapter 5? In an online dictionary, a counselor is defined as someone who helps us, a person trained to give guidance on personal, social, and psychological problems. And I know that we know this, and it's like one of those statements that really we don't have to state, but we state it anyway, and that is in all areas of our life, all areas, Jesus is perfection. He shows us perfection. He is completely qualified to be our counselor. He has all the necessary training to do all these things. Therefore, he needs to be the first one. He needs to be the first place that we need to go with all of life's situations, including, number one, a listing of those 5 points that we gave from 1 Peter 5. Number one, how to be clothed with humility. Number two, how to cast our cares upon him, upon God. Number three, how to be sober and vigilant. Number four, how to resist the devil. And number five, how to stand in God's grace. Brother, those were the 5 points that we covered in the sermon back in 1 Peter 5. Jesus is the answer. We go to him to counsel with him, to talk with him, to ask him to guide us in direction and how to do those things. The Hebrew word for wonderful, back here in Isaiah, the Hebrew word for wonderful means a miracle, a marvel, a wonder. And the word is implying, the sense of the word is implying something extraordinary. It is implying something that is incomprehensible or something that is inexplicable. The Hebrew word for counselor means to counsel, to devise purpose. If we looked at the APA's top qualities of a good counselor, APA is American Psychological Association, that's where we go on a professional level to get help, is through psychologists, and they're trained in these things. And they gave a list of what they consider to be the top qualities of a counselor. Needless to say, Jesus has all of them. I want to give you I just want to list it out. You don't have to write this down because you can go online and do the same thing I did. I just went online and said APA top qualities of counselors. That's what I typed into Google. But just listen to the to the top 6. Number 1 is communication skills. Number 2 is patience. Number 2 is confidence. Number 3 is non-judgmental. Number 5 is listening skills. Well, I guess I got 7 because I listed 5 twice. So number 6 is trust, and number 7 is respectful. Jesus has all of those. Of course he does. And all the others that they listed out. Now, we're not going to look at these particular points specifically. In fact, we're going to be adding our own list. And what I want us to know is that Jesus has all of these APA, the list, as well as the ones that we're going to add to what I'm calling my list of what makes a wonderful counselor. And so let's get into it and let's see. And remember, all of this is trying to add information to how can we get help that we can apply those points that we saw in 1 Peter 5. We go to Jesus Christ. We talk to him. That's the answer. Everything else is just filler to that answer, which is the answer to the question that I was asked. So number 1, he has wisdom and knowledge. I want to say from the very beginning, that's not a list on the APA as being a good quality characteristic to make a good quality counselor. Now, I also want you to understand, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this particular point. We're going to read several passages to show this point that Jesus has wisdom and knowledge. So first of all, go with me to the second chapter of Luke chapter 2, verse 40, Luke 2, verse 40. This is right after the birth of Jesus Christ, verse 40. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom. And the grace of God was upon him. Drop down to verse 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in the favor with God and man. Matthew 13, verse 54. Matthew 13, 54. And when he was coming to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished. They were surprised. And they said, where has this man this wisdom and these mighty acts? And the word acts there, works there, is translated in several translations as miracles. How is he doing this? How does he have so much wisdom? And how is he able to do all of these things? They were astonished and asking these questions. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24. 1 Corinthians 1, 24. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Where do you get the wisdom of God? Well, just real simple. James tells us, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and he gives it. Now, the sermon is not about how do you get wisdom. The sermon is about Jesus is the answer to how we can do all of those things in 1 Peter chapter 5. And the first point about it is he has wisdom and knowledge. But we can have, it says and the wisdom of God. He was filled with the wisdom of God. We can be filled with the wisdom of God. Continuing on here in chapter 1 Corinthians chapter 1, drop down to verse 30. But of him are in Christ Jesus, who of God is made unto us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. So obviously he's this first characteristic that I think that a good counselor has, and that is wisdom and knowledge. But I haven't finished with this point yet. Go with me now to Revelation chapter 5, verse 12. Revelation 5, verse 12. Saying with a loud voice, this is an angel, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. Isaiah 41. I told you we're going to spend a little time. We're going to read several passages, several verses. Isaiah 41, verse 10. Isaiah 41, verse 10. Fear you not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. Yes, I will uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness. That's the being Jesus Christ, which this angel just said, worthy is the Lamb, because he has all of these things. And one of those things that he listed is wisdom. Isaiah 28, verse 19. Isaiah 28, verse 19. This all comes forth from the Lord of hosts, which is wonderful in counsel and excellent in working, or is excellent in wisdom. Again, this is talking about Jesus Christ. Now, I have one more. Colossians 2 and verse 3. In whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. In whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Jesus has wisdom and knowledge. All the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, it says, they're hidden in him. And we can go to him. He's the counselor. He's the guy. He's the one, the being we go to, and we say, I need help. I don't understand. I don't know how to apply these points, specifically referring to 1 Peter chapter 5. How do I do these things? How am I clothed in humility? How do I, and you go through those points. We go to Jesus. We go to Jesus in prayer and Bible study. We go to Jesus to get the help for these points that we covered in 1 Peter chapter 5. So I asked probably a really stupid question, but I do think it is a question that needs to be asked. At least I certainly want to ask it. Who else do you want to go to be your counselor? And brethren, this is just point one. This is just point one. So let's go on. Point number two, this is my list. He is a great listener and he is quick to hear. James 1 verse 19. James 1:19, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Psalm 116 verses 1 and 2. Psalm 116 verse 1. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications. Verse 2, because he has inclined his ear unto me, therefore will I call upon him as long as I live. So how do I do these things that we read about in 1 Peter? We go to Jesus and he's clothed. In him are hidden wisdom and knowledge. He has answers. He has the knowledge of God. And he listens. Psalm 102 verse 17, he will regard, 102 verse 17, he will regard the prayer of the destitute and not despise their prayer. He's going to listen. He's going to hear us. Hebrews 13 verse 5, Hebrews 13 in verse 5. Let your conversation or let your conduct, let your way of life be without covetous and be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Wow. A counselor in the world, their office hours are between whatever hours their office hours are. Jesus says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So I want us to remember that this point number two is he is a great listener and he's quick to hear. So we move on to my next on my list. Number 3, he understands what we need before we ask him. I don't know of a counselor that can do that. Go to Matthew 6 and verse 8. Matthew 6 verse 8. Be not you therefore like unto them, for your Father knows what things you have need of before you ask him. Wow. Now, I'm going to give 4, 5, 6, and 7 all as a list, one right after the other, because I'm going to give one verse connected to all of those. And so number 4 is he has been tested and tried and overcome. Number 5, he knows about challenging circumstances. Number 6, he understands life's most intense struggles. And number 7, he has great empathy. And that's the word that I want to use. He has great empathy. All of these I have one verse in connection to them, and that's Hebrews 4, verse 15. Hebrews 4, verse 15. So let's read Hebrews 4, verse 15, and think about those points 4, 5, 6, and 7. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. So here, I ask a question. Do we know the difference between empathy and sympathy? And a second part to that question, should we? Do we need to? The difference between sympathy and empathy seems to be insignificant to most people, or to even be unimportant. What I mean by that, in different Bible translations, Hebrews 4, verse 15, some different Bible translations describe Jesus as a great high priest who sympathizes with us. And that in it by itself is a good thing. While other translations will use the word empathize in the same place. Are they the same? Well, it seems as if the two words are interchangeable, because in different translations, because in different ways, in different translations, they use either one of those words. Now, I know in the King James, where I read it, it says, which cannot be touched. That's the same phrase that others are using and saying sympathize, others use empathize. And remember, my point was he has great empathy. So let me read a couple examples how it's translated both of those words. And there are others. These are just a couple of them. The New American Standard Bible. For we do not have a high priest which cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things just as we are, yet without sin. The New King James Version. We do not have a high priest which cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. The Complete Jewish Bible. We do not have a high priest unable to empathize with our weaknesses, since in every respect he was tempted just as we are, the only difference being that he did not sin. And I have one more, and it's the New International Version, the NIV. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Okay, so here, now is the point that I'm making about Jesus having great empathy, not simply sympathy. The reason I'm making this difference is because most psychologists, most counselors in the world, they are really good at sympathy. You see, brother, when we relate with another person with sympathy, we move into what would be referred to as the problem-solving mode. Now, even by itself, that's not wrong. There's not a problem with that. It's just Jesus has more than that. When we move into this problem-solving mode, when we deal with another person with sympathy, We have ideas and we have judgments about how the person feels and what they should do. And you see, brethren, what this does is it not only minimizes the person's problems, it ignores their feelings. Sympathy comes from our ego. Now, what I mean by that is it comes from the sense of our own worth. I'm in charge, so I have the answers to your problems. Now, is Jesus in charge and does he have the answers? Of course he's in charge and of course he has the answers. But he has so much more than that. Sympathy is what we know we should do, and often it is telling others what to do or how to feel. Now, when we relate to another person with empathy, we give that person permission to own. We give that person permission to have their own emotions and feelings. And that gets messy sometimes, I know. In other words, we are reflecting on what they are feeling, and we offer them what is called, in APA terms, counseling, a safe space for all emotions. We give them a safe place for all emotions. Yes, even the negative ones. Because when it comes to empathizing with another question, when we're really dealing with that person, it is not of and by itself about what is right and what is wrong. Now, ultimately, is it about what is right and wrong? Yeah, but we're going to lead them. We're going to guide them to that. We have an example of this, of Jesus doing this. It is when Jesus, it's on the morning of the last great day of the Feast of Tabernacles. I realize they're separated, but you understand the point. It's when they brought the woman who was caught in the act of adultery, and it is his reaction to her that is a classic illustration of showing empathy toward another person. It's John 8, verses 1 through 11. John 8, verse 1 through 11. Go with me there. John 8, verse 1. When Jesus went into the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. Okay, just reading the background. Verse 3. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. How they happened, another story. Verse 5. And they go on and they say, now, Moses and the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you have to say? Verse 6. This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. And Jesus did one of the most incredible things. It is as if he is just ignoring them. He stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. Now, hold your place here, because we're going to come right back. But I want you to go to Jeremiah 17. Have you ever wondered what he wrote on the ground? Yeah, of course you have. Well, go with me to Jeremiah 17. I'm going to give you a verse that is this the answer to what did he write on the ground? I'll let you decide. verse 13, Jeremiah 17, verse 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all that forsake you shall be ashamed, and they that depart from me shall be written in the earth. For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. So let's go back to John 8 and verse 7. Verse 6, he stoops down as if he's not listening to him, and he's writing on the ground. Verse 7, so when they continued asking him, he lifted himself up and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. Verse 8, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. A couple of translations said continued writing on the ground. If he's writing names on the ground, maybe he hasn't listed them all yet. I'm just reading the verses. Verse 9, this is still in John 8, verse 9. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the least. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Verse 10. When Jesus had lifted himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto him, Woman, where are those your accusers? Has no man condemned you? And she said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. I'm telling you, this is an incredible classic illustration of showing empathy toward another person. Now, while sympathy comes, I said, from ego, empathy empathy comes from the heart. The feeling of the person who is empathizing toward the other person. Empathy is feeling another person's pain, and it is sharing a human experience with this other person. I mean, remember, we were told Jesus was tempted in all points like as we are, yet he did not sin. He didn't have to sin. He didn't have to sin. We don't have to sin to be able to empathize with another person, to use the terms here, that was caught in the very act. Brethren, the difference between having a sympathetic Savior, in other words, one who feels for us, versus an empathetic Savior, that is, one who feels with us, is huge. Yet some treat it as if the two words are interchangeable. They are not. They are not. Jesus can empathize because he knows every trial that we might go through. Tempted in all points. So let's go on. My list. Number 8. He is available at all hours. Now, I already stated that counselors, their office, they have to have office hours. They're not there at all times. I understand they're human. I understand that you understand it. But Jesus is available at all hours. Psalm 121, verses 1 through 4. 121, verse 1. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence comes my help. In other words, I'm looking up to God. My help comes from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer or allow my foot to be moved. He that keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he that keeps Israel shall never slumber nor sleep. He's available all hours. Number 9, he is a miracle worker. He is a miracle worker. John 4, verse 46, beginning in verse 46. John 4, verse 46. So Jesus came again into Canaan of Galilee, where he made the water wine. We know that story. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When the nobleman, when he heard that Jesus was come out of Galilee, come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto Jesus and besought him and asked him if he would come down and heal his son, for his son, was at the point of death. Then said Jesus unto him, except you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The nobleman, see, that's what Jesus told him. That's a sympathetic advisor or counselor. That was how he answered him to start with. Jesus did both at times because he was testing the other person to see where they were coming from. The nobleman said unto him, Sir, come down ere my child die. Jesus said unto him, Go your way, your son lives. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. Now, Jesus, he obviously, we're not getting the words here, but it's obvious that Jesus saw something, sensed something from the nobleman in his response. Verse 51, and as he was going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Your son lives. Now, that's a wonderful thing, right? Continue on here. Then inquired he of them which hour when he began to amend. And they said unto him, Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. And so the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said unto him, Your son lives. And himself believes, and his whole house. See, we don't have all the words. How does the whole house? Well, because he had to share with him what Jesus had done. So, wow. So my point was, he's a miracle worker. Number 10, this is my list again. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows the end from the beginning. Isaiah 46, verse 10, declaring the end from the beginning, Isaiah 46:10, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. He says it, and he can cause it to happen. A human counselor can't do that. Jesus can do that. Number 11, he is truth. He is truth. John 14, verse 6. John 14:6. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. Number 12, he is tender and compassionate. Psalm 145, verse 8, 145, verse 8. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. You need to read that verse for yourself in other translations because it opens it up. It's much bigger than that. Isaiah 40, verse 11, Isaiah 40, verse 11. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arms and carry them in his bosom. And what this is saying is, this is implying that it is something that is very up close and personal. And shall gently lead those that are with young. Number 13. The words he speaks are spirit and they are life. John 6:63. John 6:63. It is the spirit that quickens or makes alive. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. Those are incredible words whenever you just read the words. A human counselor, as trained as they are and as trained as they can be, and they have a place. They have a place. They don't have all of these. They don't have these kinds of qualities that Jesus had. So I want you, if you would, to go back with this in mind, to go back with me to Isaiah 9 and verse 6. Just the first part of the verse. Isaiah 9 and verse 6. Isaiah 9 and verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. So in trying to answer the person's question, can you give us help in how we can really understand and how we can apply these points in First Peter chapter 5? I think I just did. There may be maybe another way of answering the question. This is the way I'm answering it. And so I ask, who else would you want to counsel with? Who else would you want to go to and say, how do I live this way of life? I see these points that are in 1 Peter 5, and whatever points that we can come up with in any sermonette and any sermon and Bible study that we personally do and all of that. How do I apply these things? The answer is Jesus Christ. Jesus, our wonderful counselor. So we go to him in prayer and Bible study to be close to him. And we ask him, please guide us. Would you please show us? I believe these points are worthy to be put into effect in my lives. I want to live these points. I want to live this way of life. I need help. Would you help me? Jesus is the first. Jesus is the place to go. Because like I said, he is our wonderful counselor. He knows it all. The Aaronic blessing. The Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speaking to Aaron and unto his sons, saying, on this wise you shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. We have Jesus that we can go to. We have been so blessed. Why would we not take advantage of that? God bless you all. God loves you. I love you. Happy Sabbath to you all.